This was my first project with a basement, and I had also never lived in a house with a basement, so I was clueless that mold and water issues are very common, but I was about to learn. Stay tuned for the full story. Welcome to the Mastering Real Estate Podcast. This podcast is for real estate investors and professionals looking to take their real estate game to the next level. On Tuesdays, I analyze the industry's leading real estate books and break down the main lessons that you can apply to your life and business. Then on Thursdays, I review the lessons I have learned from flipping over 100 houses and being a full-time real estate investor since 2018. Stay tuned each week so that we can all become masters of real estate together. Welcome back to episode 12 of the podcast. A lot of people in this industry only talk about their successes and wins, but not me. My lessons learned have been hard earned, and I want to share them with you so that hopefully you can avoid some of the mistakes that I've made along the way as I learned to become a professional real estate investor. Today, we are talking about project number 6, a bigger flip where we try something new. Before we get into it, I'm your host, Maura. I've been a full-time real estate investor since 2018, managed over 100 flips, founded and grew a real estate investment firm and property management company, and I live and work in the real estate industry every day. Let's get into the story. My 6th project was a bigger flip than my last few cosmetic flips, and we had just recently spent a good chunk of our profits from our last few flips to buy our first rental property, which I talked about in episode 10. Another deal came up, and I had enough money to purchase the house, but not enough money to also fund the rehab. I decided to try something new and partner with a local contractor that I'd come to know on the project. We wrote up an operating agreement and agreed to do a 50-50 profit split if my company funded the purchase of the property and coordinated the sale, and his contracting company funded and managed the rehab. At the time, I thought I was very clever and creative for coming up with this idea. Well, let me tell you, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows on this project. After a few successes and some built-up confidence, the real estate gods decided I was ready for another test. Before we get deeper into the story, let's review some of the basic property details of this project. We found the house through a local wholesaler, and it was located at 4770 Elfreth Johnson Drive in Birmingham, Alabama. The project was a flip. The house was built in 1974, and it was just over 1,000 square feet. Originally, the house was a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house, which we converted into a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house. Bought and sold the house in 2019. In total, the project took 5 months. The project cost us $60,000, and that's because the purchase price of the house was $58,000. Then we had to pay about $1,500 for a septic inspection and clean out. And as you might remember, we partnered with a contractor group, and they were responsible for the price of the rehab. So they took care of that part, which, if I recall correctly, was about $20,000. Then we sold the house for $80,000. with a profit of just over $20,000 to split between my company and the contractors. Okay, back to the story. So this was a more in-depth rehab than our past few projects. We ended up finishing the basement, adding a bedroom. We completely redid the kitchen and bathrooms. We installed new flooring throughout the house, installed all new fixtures, painted the entire interior, installed a new HVAC, and did some landscape. In total, the project took 5 months, which was far too long for a project of this scope. Although it was a more in-depth rehab than our past few light cosmetic flips, a project of this scope should really only take 2 or 3 months. At first, things were going okay. There were a few frustrations with our contractor partners not moving quickly, but overall, things were okay until we started the inspection process for the sale. during construction, I was able to coordinate an off-market sale to another buy and hold investor through RP Capital, which was similar to what I did with project number 4, which I talk about in episode 8. And this was great. We weren't going to have to wait the full 30-day sales cycle at the end of construction, which was good for everyone. However, as we started preparing for the sale, we started noticing mold in our newly finished basement. Mind you, this was the first project I had ever done with a basement. And I had also never lived in a home with a basement before, so I was clueless about water and mold issues being very common in basements. Long story short, there was an issue with the French drain around the house and water was seeping into the basement walls. So at first we tried a couple of quick and cheap fixes to try to get rid of the mold before we realized that the issue wasn't going away. We ended up needing to do a much more extensive fix of the French drain and basement walls, including adding waterproofing materials to the walls and overhauling the drain system. This added a lot more expense to the project, and we had to delay our closing. And the buyers almost backed out of the sale completely because they were worried about the mold. But somehow I was able to save the sale and prove that we had legitimately fixed the issue. But this was a very good lesson learned for me about basements. So now my advice to other investors would be to beware of basements, and before buying a house with a basement, make sure to get it Make sure to get your basement moisture tested, and also talk to some local contractors about common issues that they see with basements in your area. And make sure that you have a good idea of some common repair costs just in case something comes up that doesn't get caught on your inspection. Another big lesson that I started to learn with this project was about partnering with contractors. At the time, I thought my profit split idea with the contractors was very clever. And in theory, it should have worked. Our incentives were perfectly aligned and we brought complementary skill sets to the partnership. However, for some reason, partnering with contractors rarely works out well. A few more experienced investors warned me about this early on, but I didn't believe it until I had experienced it several times myself. For some reason, contractors just think differently than most investors. Even though you might be seemingly aligned in your goals, incentives, and finances, it still just doesn't work for some reason. Believe me, I had to learn this lesson several more times, as you will hear in future episodes, before I really understood that it just doesn't work. Now, of course, this is a large generalization, and there are some unicorns out there that make partnerships like this work, but they are the rare exception. And you can confirm this with other investors. So now, in my opinion, it's better just to keep the relationship with your contractor simple and straightforward, and pay your contractor to do his outlined scope of work. And don't try to get fancy. Don't try to enter into some sort of partnership, because the odds are that it's ultimately not going to work out. Okay, in summary, my 2 key takeaways from this project are: number 1, be careful of basements. Know that they are very prone to mold, water, and structural issues. And number 2, don't partner with contractors. Just trust me on that. Let's give a quick thanks to our show sponsor, Duratus Academy, which makes this podcast possible. We have a bunch of awesome free investor resources located on our website, duratusacademy.com, as well as all of our podcast show notes and our masterclass about how to get started in real estate investing. So make sure that you check that out. Thanks so much for listening to this short and sweet episode. I hope that some of my lessons learned will help you in your real estate journey. And stay tuned next week when I talk about buying my first house on the courthouse steps. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. We are a new and growing podcast, so every rating, review, and share helps immensely. Also, make sure that you're following us on social media, where you'll see a lot more behind the scenes content on a daily basis. See you every Tuesday and Thursday.